Welcome back. We are now on Lecture 9, Error Checking and Exceptions. This covers section 5.5 from the textbook. We have encountered various errors in the past. Example, name error, type error, value error. You may not remember this, but we have encountered. Regardless, I have compiled a small file, Lecture 9 codes. All right. Now this file is in your Lecture 9 files of Dropbox, okay, as well as Lecture 9 files of Blackboard. All right. So you have access to this particular file. So I'll play with this and I'll remind you where we encounter various errors. Okay, here are a few examples. All right, so it would be nice to run it on a shell. So suppose we import math, right, and try to find the square root of negative 10. Math dot square root negative 10. Okay, so it's giving me value error. All right, value error, math domain error. So what is the domain for square root function? 0 or higher, you see, close 0 until infinity. And we put in negative 10, that's what it's complaining, and that's the value error. Now let's put in some math dot square root of some variable a. Okay, now it's complaining, name error. Name A is not defined. So I used a name without first defining it. Suppose A equals 25. And now I say math dot square root A. No problem. You see? So without defining, I use something, and that's name error. So value error when the domain was not being matched, and name error when the function doesn't know what that value is, right? Now here is another example. Suppose I put in string, math dot square root string a, type error. I put in a string, and that is a problem because what is in the domain of square root? It must be a real number, not a string object. So the type of object we gave as a parameter, as an argument, was not correct. All right. Then what about 2 over 0? Zero division error. All right. I'm dividing by 0. That is a problem. Right. Likewise, what about int of a? Oh, I know a to be. What about int of x? Name error. Int of string a, value error. All right. So int of string a is value error because I could have said string 3.4. Okay, that's also a value error. Okay, so on the other hand, int of string 3, it's able to convert. You understand? So be mindful, there are different kinds of errors. Okay, we have seen a few, so you might want to play with these yourselves and come up with more different examples. Now let's try the first code, right? Before we go to error checking, each of these types of standard errors is a subclass of a general exception class. There is something called exception class. Each of the errors we have is a subclass or a child class of the exception class. Exceptions are used to report scenarios that are out of the ordinary. The result of an exception is to immediately stop the current executing code. For instance, if your code involves the following: Give me, enter a number from 1 to 10. So you want the user to give you a number from 1 to 10. Whatever you get is an input, and then you're going to take int out of it. So remember, int of string 3 is a valid input, string 3. So you might put string 3 there, and that's okay. All right. You would like to make certain that the user inputs number from 1 to 10. Now, what if the user puts 11 or a -5? You should be able to catch it, and that is called try except approach. Okay, so there are all these errors, built-in errors that Python will catch. But what if you want to write a code which forces the user to input the correct value? Then you use the approach of try except. All right. So let's try this code. Number is 0, while not number between 1 and 10, try. Number is int of input, enter a number from 1 to 10. If not between 1 and 10, print. Your number must be between 1 and 10. Except value error. That's not a valid integer. So what does it do? Let's play with this code. Let me start a new file and try the code we just read. Okay, so we want to be able to catch an error. All right, so this if statement makes sure that the user gives something between 1 and 10. All right, but what if user puts in something like A, B, or something like that? Okay, so let's call, and I'll save it in my lecture 9 folder. Okay, now let's run this. Give me an integer between 1 and 10. Suppose I gave it -20. It's complaining. Your number must be. So which part of the code is being used? If not between 1 and 10, your number should be from 1 to 10. Okay, so that's the part of the code because I gave it -20. Suppose I give it 25, so that's beyond 10. I want this to show up again. It did, right? Your number must be between 1 and 10, and then again it's asking for, because my while loop is still valid. Now suppose I give it something like letter A. Aha, that is not a valid. In other words, it caught that value error. Suppose I say X, it catches it. Suppose I give it string A, it catches it. So except value error, it seems to catch everything. Finally, let me give it 5, and it worked. Okay, because I'm between 1 and 10, so that if did not have to work out a number. What is number? Number is 5. All right, so this was a good one. Now this approach was fine, but what do? We know several kinds of errors. Value error, end of file error, type error. We also saw division by 0 error, and so on. Mind you, most of those errors won't work here because I'm getting input from a user, which means whatever the user gives me is in the form of a string. And if you remember, int of a string, if at all it gives me an error, it will be a value error. Okay, so notice I have placed an X here, but X is not a string. Anytime I give it a string which doesn't work, it's a value error. Here is a string which doesn't work, gives me a value error. Here is a string which works, so it got accepted. Because int of this makes sense. int of this string doesn't make sense because you first have to convert it to a float. String 3.4 has to be first converted to a float and then you can take int of it. Okay, so notice all I will see is value error. EOF stands for end of file error, which does not apply because we are not using a file, but this is how you would catch any errors when you're reading off of a file. And this option also you will not encounter when you're getting input from the user. Okay, so what is this for? This is for any error you might have missed. So in this case, you're getting something from an user, but when you write your code, you may not do that. You may not get number from a user. This may just be part of some larger code and you want to catch possible errors. If you have run out of ideas of which error you might catch or not catch, write down except by itself, which means any possible error that you may have missed, it will catch here. All right, so let's play with this one code. Okay, there's the second code. Let me remind you that this particular file is in Dropbox and Blackboard for you. So enter a number, right? So 23, it's complaining. -20, it's complaining, as it should, because this is the part where I'm not between 1 and 10. Now suppose I give it a, it's complaining. That's not a valid integer. In other words, I'm hitting value error. I give it string 3.4. That's not a valid integer, so I'm hitting value error. Suppose I give it simply 3.4. That's not a valid integer. Again, I'm hitting value error because int of a, when I give it 3.4, it's being read as a string. Okay, it becomes string here, so int of string 3.4 doesn't work. So lastly, let me give it 4 and it worked. So what is my number? It is 4. Okay, this video may be too long. I'll continue with the next video now.